The Problem with Love by Jeremy Chaput. Acknowledgements. I would first like to thank my grade 11 English teacher, Miss Kleinstuber, for inspiring me to write this book. Without her inspiring me, this book would have never been written. Secondly, I would like to thank my family that knew about and supported me while writing this book. Thirdly, I would like to thank everyone at Lockerbie Composite School for having my back throughout the process of writing this book. Finally, I would like to thank everyone on my Instagram and anyone else whom I forgot to mention for supporting me through the process. This book is dedicated to the memory of my mom and grandpa. Hello, listener. My name is Jeremy Chaput, and I am the author of the book you're about to listen to. I decided to write this book as part of a project for my grade 11 English class. Our teacher told us to pick something we were passionate about and do a project about it. I love romance books, so I decided to write my own. This is my first book, so please give it a chance. I will try to get better if I write more in the future. Thank you for giving my first book a chance. Before you enjoy listening, I have a few questions for you. How will Amelia and Brian's love story end? Will Brian live to see the prom? Is Jack really Jack? What do you think? Have fun and enjoy listening. Now allow me to introduce you to the main characters. Brian Connors is the protagonist of this story. He is a 17-year-old in his last year of high school. He lives at home with his mom Erin, his dad Ethan, and his three brothers Troy, Mark, and Vernon. He and Jack have been friends since elementary school. He is also obese. Jack Grimes is the antagonist of this story. He is a 17-year-old in his last year of high school. We don't know much about him other than the fact both his parents died when he was 8. He and Brian have been friends since elementary school. Amelia Drew is the love interest for both main characters in this story. She is a 16-year-old in her 11th year of high school. Like Jack, we don't know much about her besides the fact both her parents died when she was 10. Now that you have met the main characters, have fun listening. Chapter 1: The School. Brian and Jack are both working in the school cafeteria at Silver Oak High. Brian is the cashier and Jack serves the food. Jack and Brian are talking when Brian looks up to see the most stunning girl he has ever seen. Before Brian can open his mouth, the girl says, "My name is Amelia. How much do I owe you?" Jack can tell Brian is nervous and gives him a little jab with his elbow. Brian finally says, "Your total is $2. She hands him the $2 and heads into the lunchroom. Brian and Jack continue to work for another 10 minutes before their boss comes in, which means their work is done. Brian cleans his area as fast as he can, grabs some food, and heads to a table in the lunchroom. 5 minutes later, Jack joins him with his food. They start to eat when Brian says, "Jack, do you remember the beautiful girl from earlier named Amelia?" and points towards the table where she's sitting. Jack says he does and wonders where the conversation is going. Before Jack can ask Brian a question, Brian says, "I like her." Jack is surprised by this. He says to Brian, "If you like her so much, why don't you go over and talk to her?" Brian looks nervous, so Jack says, "You get nervous when you talk to girls, don't you?" Brian asks Jack what gave it away. Jack says, "It's just a hunch." What feels like 10 minutes passes before Jack and Brian's conversation is interrupted by Amelia. "Can I talk to Brian alone?" she says. Jack says sure, says goodbye to Brian, and then leaves. Amelia sits at the table with Brian. "I overheard you talking with Jack, and I heard what you said. After Amelia says that, Brian looks like he has seen a ghost. To try and calm Brian down, Amelia tells him that she likes him too. To Amelia's surprise, Brian calms down and finally says, "You like me too?" Amelia says she does, and then does something completely unexpected and asks Brian on a date after school. Brian agrees to the date. Amelia tells him to meet her outside after school and then leaves. Jack walks back into the lunchroom and asks Brian what that was all about. Brian tells him everything. Jack says, "She asked you on a date and you said yes? That's amazing." Just then, the bell rings and everyone heads to their next class. Chapter 2: The Date. It's the end of the school day, and Brian walks outside to see Amelia waiting for him. Amelia says to him, "I hope you don't mind, but we're going to stay here for our date." Brian says, "I don't mind. I'll go talk to my boss and see if I can make some food for us." Just then, they hear a car honk its horn. Amelia walks over to the car, grabs a pizza box off the passenger seat, and walks back over to Brian, who is now sitting at the table. "How did you know my favorite food is pizza?" Brian asks. Amelia says that it's her favorite too. She sits at the table with Brian and opens the box. She says, "I didn't know what you like, so I just got pepperoni and cheese." They sit, talk, and eat for about 10 minutes. Suddenly, Brian says to Amelia, "Is the person in the car over there watching us?" and points towards a Ford Mustang that is sitting in the parking lot. Amelia says, "Yeah, they are." So Brian tells her to wait at the table, and he heads over to the car to talk to the person. When Brian gets to the car, the driver rolls down his window. To his surprise, the driver is none other than his best friend, Jack. Brian says to him, "What the hell are you doing here, man?" Jack tells Brian he's here to make sure he doesn't screw up his date. They talk for a minute until Brian says, "Come on, we have to go talk to Amelia." So Jack gets out of the car and they both walk back to the table and sit with Amelia. Brian introduces them to each other. Jack asks Amelia how the date is going. "Fine until you showed up, Jack. How could you get your best friend to spy on us, Brian?" she says. Brian gets defensive and tells her he would never do that, then asks Jack why he was spying on them. Jack says, "The only reason I was spying on your date is because you told me to, Brian. You told me you were nervous and wanted me to make sure you didn't screw up." Brian looks shocked and starts yelling at Jack. Brian and Jack yell back and forth while Amelia just sits there. They continue to argue until Jack says something to Brian that he doesn't like. "The only reason I'm friends with a fat idiot like you is because nobody else wants to." Brian, who usually doesn't resort to violence, punches Jack in the face. Amelia doesn't like where this is going, so she goes into the school to get help. When Amelia comes back outside with the principal and two teachers, Jack is on top of Brian on the ground beating the pulp out of him. They pull Jack off Brian. Brian gets up off the ground and the teachers take him inside to the nurse's office to get cleaned up. Meanwhile, the principal stays outside with Jack to help him. Amelia tells the principal everything that happened. The principal says to Jack, "It sounds like you started the whole fight." Before Jack can say anything, the principal tells him that he is suspended for 1 week. He also tells him that when he gets back to school, he must serve a 1 week lunchtime suspension and he has to stay after school to talk to the guidance counselor. Just then, an ambulance pulls up and the 4 paramedics rush into the school with a backboard. Before the principal even has time to open the door to go into the school, they rush back out with Brian on the backboard, put him into the ambulance, and drive away. One of the teachers who took Brian into the school comes out and stands beside the principal. The principal asks him what happened. "We got Brian to the nurse's office, and the nurse started cleaning him up. He was fine, talking to us and telling us what happened. Then he started coughing up blood and passed out. The nurse couldn't find his pulse, so the other teacher ran and got the defibrillator while I called for the ambulance. The principal asked him if they got his heartbeat back. The teacher said they did, but it was weak. The principal tells Amelia and Jack to go home. Chapter 3. The Hospital. The Connors rush into the ER waiting room. Brian's mom, Erin, says to one of the nurses, "Our son Brian Connors was just rushed into the back by the ambulance that came from Silver Oak High." The nurse tells her that Brian is back there, but only one person can go see him right now. Erin tells her husband Ethan to go, and that she will stay with the boys. When Ethan gets to the back, he goes to the nurse's station and says, "I'm looking for my son Brian Connors. An ambulance just rushed him in here from Silver Oak High." A doctor walking by says to the nurse that he's got this, and then says to Ethan, "I'm Dr. Harvey. I'm one of the doctors working on your son. Let's go get the rest of your family and talk in the family room." The doctor and Ethan head back to the waiting room, get the rest of the family, head into the family room, and all sit down. The doctor introduces himself to the rest of the family and tells them they need to talk. Erin starts to cry, then says, "Please tell me he's alive at least." Dr. Harvey tells the family that he is alive, but in a coma. "We had to put him on a machine that breathes for him as well. We don't know when he will wake up. We don't know if he will wake up." One of Brian's brothers, Mark, asks the doctor if he can see him. The doctor tells him that until the swelling goes down, it would be better if nobody sees him the way he is. The doctor tells the family to go home and that he will personally call them with any updates or when they can come in and see him. Chapter 4. Jack's First Day Back. Today is Jack's first day back in school since his fight with Brian. He enters the side door, walks towards the main office, and notices everyone staring at him and staying away from him. He gets to the office where Principal Owens is waiting for him. "Morning, Jack. We need to talk," he says in a serious voice. They head into his office and sit down. The principal asks Jack if he has talked to anyone since the fight. Jack says he hasn't and asks Mr. Owens what's going on. Mr. Owens says, "Your fight with Brian landed him in the hospital in a coma. Because of that, all the students are scared of you and don't want to be near you." Jack asks the principal what that means. The principal says, "Since Brian's family hasn't pressed charges yet, they went to the school board and decided your fate." Jack asks the principal what happened in the meeting. The principal hands him a piece of paper that has the following written on it. To student Jack Grimes. This is School Superintendent Donovan. Yesterday, I had a meeting with Brian's parents. I told them I would have you expelled immediately for what you did. They told me that even after what you did, they are not pressing charges yet. And if I try to suspend you until they decide if they are pressing charges or not, they will get lawyers involved. So I agreed you could stay in school under any conditions they chose. Their conditions are as follows. First, you must stay in a room guarded by 3 guards all day and do your classes in said room. Secondly, you must be followed to the cafeteria or anywhere in the school in handcuffs by the guards. The only time you may have the cuffs taken off is in the bathroom. Finally, you must go to daily meetings with the principal and guidance counselor. Even after what you did to Brian, they offered to pay for the guards to watch you. I told them that there was no need. Since I didn't want you in the school, but they did, I told them I would pay for the guards personally. And one more thing that Brian's parents agreed to. Failure to follow these conditions will result in your immediate suspension from this school, any other school I look after, and possibly any school in this province. From School Superintendent Donovan. Jack, with a look of both shock and surprise on his face, hands the letter back to Principal Owens and asks him what happens now. Mr. Owens hits a button on the phone to call the secretary and tells her to send them in. Mr. Owens says, "The guards are going to come in. put you in handcuffs, and take you to see each of your teachers to get your work for today. Then they are going to bring you back here and put you in that room across the hall, which is your new home until further notice. The guards come in, put Jack in handcuffs, and take him to see his first teacher. Meanwhile, Principal Owens is sitting at his desk when the secretary calls him to tell him that a student wants to talk to him. He tells the secretary to send the student in. To his surprise, Amelia opens the door. "Amelia, is everything okay?" he asks her. Amelia tells Mr. Owens that she just saw Jack and asks why he's still in school. He tells her everything, then asks her why she needed to talk to him. Amelia says to Mr. Owens, "I have been talking to Brian's brothers these past couple of days. They told me that starting tomorrow, friends are allowed to go in and see him." Principal Owen asks if that means he's awake. Amelia says, "Unfortunately, no. But I was wondering if I could take all of tomorrow off to go see him. Now, I have already talked to my worker and teachers. They said it's okay with them as long as it's okay with you and the guidance counselor." He tells Amelia that they should go talk to the guidance counselor together to see what she says. He calls the secretary and tells her that he's stepping out of the office, and they walk to see Miss Anderson. Miss Anderson is standing at her office door when they get there. Amelia goes in and sits down. Mr. Owens talks to Miss Anderson for a couple of minutes outside the office, and then they both go in and sit down. Miss Anderson says, "Principal Owens tells me you want to take all of tomorrow off to go see Brian. Are you sure that's such a good idea, Amelia?" Amelia tells the two of them that she has been coming to the meetings, which is helping, but she is still falling behind in her classes because she is worried about Brian. She says that once she sees him, even if she doesn't talk to him, she will be able to focus more. The three of them talk for another 5 minutes until Mrs. Anderson says, "It's fine with me under one condition. You come to 2 meetings with me the next day instead of 1. Amelia tells her that it's a deal and then looks at Principal Owens, who says it's fine with him. Amelia thanks both of them for their time and heads back to class. Chapter 5. Amelia's Visit. Amelia enters Brian's hospital room and sees Mr. and Mrs. Connors standing there. Amelia says, "Oh, I didn't know somebody else was already here. I'll come back later." Aaron tells Amelia that they have been there for hours and that they were just leaving. She also tells Amelia to stay for as long as she wants as they turn the corner and leave. After Brian's parents are gone, Amelia sits down in one of the chairs. She sits there for 10 minutes before she finally says something. "Hey Brian, it's Amelia. I hope you can hear me because I want to apologize now before you wake up and find this out from somebody else. The fight between you and Jack is partly my fault. The only reason Jack was watching us." Before she could finish what she was saying, a nurse enters the room. She tells Amelia that she needs to leave the room for a few minutes so she can run some tests on Brian. Amelia leaves Brian's room and waits in the hallway. 5 minutes later, the nurse comes out and tells Amelia she can go back in. Amelia goes back in and sits down again. She continues what she was saying earlier. "The only reason Jack was watching us is because Jack and I are dating and have been for the past 3 years." She starts to cry until she hears the machines Brian is hooked up to go crazy. Dr. Harvey and a nurse rush in. Dr. Harvey says, "His heart stopped. We need help in here now." As more people rush into the room, the nurse who came in with Dr. Harvey takes Amelia to the waiting room and stays with her. What feels like 15 minutes later, Dr. Harvey comes out to talk to Amelia. Dr. Harvey says, "I talked to the Connors already. They told me I can tell you anything." He tells Amelia that they got Brian's heart started again, but he needs to rest. He also tells Amelia that Mr. Connors is on his way to pick her up and drive her home. Dr. Harvey asks the nurse to stay with Amelia until he arrives. 20 minutes later, Ethan walks into the room and says, "Amelia, I'm here. Come on." Amelia thanks the nurse, gets up, and leaves with Ethan. Chapter 6. The truth revealed. Amelia enters the front door of the school and sees Miss Anderson standing there. Good morning, Amelia. Would you like to have your first meeting with me now or at lunch? She says. Amelia tells her they may as well do it now and get it over with, and they walk to Mrs. Anderson's office and sits down. Miss Anderson asks Amelia how her visit with Brian went, and Amelia starts to cry. It went terrible, and I feel like a terrible person. Miss Anderson asked her what happened. Amelia, still crying, says, I told Brian the truth about Jack and his heart stopped, and he almost died again. Miss Anderson, only hearing about Brian's heart, asked if they got it started again. Amelia says they did, but he needed his rest, so she didn't go back in to see him again after that. The bell for the first period rings, and Miss Anderson says, You head off to class, and we will continue talking about this in our meeting after school. Amelia composes herself and heads off to class. It's now lunchtime, and Amelia is in Principal Owens' office talking to him. Listen, Mr. Owens, I need to talk to Jack privately without the guards being there. It's really important. Mr. Owens says that he can't allow it as he's afraid Jack would hurt her for being a witness to the fight. Amelia tells Mr. Owens that won't happen and that she just needs 5 minutes alone to talk to Jack about something really important. Mr. Owens says, Fine, you can have 5 minutes as long as you write a short statement that says you understand the staff or school can't be held responsible if anything happens, and signs it. You also have to allow the secretary to be in here as a witness. Amelia agrees and gets a piece of paper and pen out of her backpack. Meanwhile, Mr. Owens hits the button on his phone and asks the secretary to come into his office. The secretary enters the office and Mr. Owens explains to her what is happening. Amelia writes the statement, signs it, and hands the statement to Principal Owens, who signs it. He then hands the statement to the secretary, who signs it, heads back to her desk, and files the statement. Amelia and Mr. Owens get up and head to the room across the hall where Jack is being held. Mr. Owens talks to the guards for a few minutes, then heads back to his office. One of the guards knocks on the door and says, Grimes, you have a visitor. Jack looks at the open doorway and his jaw drops. Amelia, what the hell are you doing here? He says. Amelia tells Jack that they only have 5 minutes to talk. She then tells him about her visit with Brian yesterday when his heart stopped. She says, I told him the truth about us. I think that's what made his heart stop. Jack asks her why she told Brian the truth. She says, I feel guilty about this whole situation. I know about your past and he doesn't. That's the only reason I agreed to go on the fake date with him to begin with when you asked. Jack says that he's glad Amelia decided to go on the date, but he didn't force her. Force me? You told me if I didn't go on the date with him, you would break up with me, says Amelia. Jack just laughs. Amelia says that at her next meeting with Mr. Anderson, she's going to ask Mr. Owens to be there and she's going to tell them everything. Jack, now looking angry, says, If you do that, I will kill you, just like I tried to kill Brian for taking you away from me. If I can't have you, nobody can. A guard opens the door and tells Amelia her time is up. Amelia walks towards the door and as she does says, 2 more quick things. Number 1, you and I are over. Number 2, she pauses in the doorframe, pulls out her phone, and waves it in the air. Thanks for the confession, before she walks away and the guard closes the door. Amelia heads back to Mr. Owens' office and goes in. He is in there talking on the phone. Mr. Owens, I need to talk to you. It's a matter of life or death. Mr. Owens tells the person on the phone he will call them back and hangs up. He then asks Amelia what the problem is. Amelia, talking fast, says, We need to have an emergency meeting in the boardroom now with myself, you, Superintendent Donovan, Miss Anderson, the police, and Brian's family. Principal Owen tells Amelia to slow down and asks her why they need to have a meeting with all those people. She tells Mr. Owens bits and pieces about her and Jack, then plays him the audio she recorded in the meeting.
After the recording ends, Principal Owens says to Amelia, "Go tell the secretary to set up the boardroom for an emergency meeting, and then tell the guards not to take Jack to lunch." Chapter 7. The Emergency Meeting. Principal Owens enters the boardroom where everybody is sitting waiting for him. He sits down and Superintendent Donovan is the first to speak up. "Why have you called an emergency meeting with all these people?" he asks. Before Mr. Owens can say anything, Amelia stands up and says, "Because of me. It's time that everyone knows the truth." She looks at Brian's family and says, "I'm sorry in advance for not speaking up sooner." Mr. Donovan asks her what's going on. Amelia says, "Jack and I have been dating for the past 3 years. I broke up with him today after I got what I needed that I will play for you later." Miss Connor cuts in and says, "If you were dating Jack, why did you go on a date with Brian?" Mr. Owens asks her to allow Amelia to continue. "As you know, because of Brian's obesity, he has been having a hard time dating," she continues. "So Jack came up with a plan for me to go on a fake date with Brian to make him feel better about himself. But the only way I would agree to go on the date is if Jack secretly watched us from the parking lot. Not because I didn't feel safe around Brian, because Jack and I were dating." She goes on to explain the rest of the fake date plan and everything that happened before the fight started. She continues, "Now we get to where the fight started. The two of them were arguing back and forth until Jack said to Brian that the only reason he was friends with a fat idiot like him was because nobody else wanted to be, and then Brian punched Jack. This time Miss Connors cuts in and says, "That's not true. He would never punch anyone." Principal Owen says that he has a video to confirm that Brian threw the first punch if anyone wants to see it. Nobody does. Amelia continues, "Since I know about Jack's past, I went in to get help as soon as Brian punched him." Mr. Donovan asks Amelia what she means about knowing about Jack's past. Amelia explains, "Jack told me that he moved to Ontario from Alberta after he was suspended from 5 different schools for fighting. I guess this is the one time nobody was there to stop him before he had time to hurt anybody too badly." Erin is sitting in her chair crying while Ethan is holding her. Again, "I'm sorry I didn't come forward sooner with the truth about Jack. I was scared that if I did, he would hurt me or go after Brian." Mr. Owens asks Amelia why Jack would have gone after Brian if she came forward. She explains that Brian is the only other person in her life she cares about. She says that before she started dating Jack, she liked Brian, but thought everyone would start making fun of her too if they started dating, so when Jack asked her out, she said yes. Brian's older brother Mark asks her, "During your visit yesterday, did you telling him you like him make his heart stop?" Amelia tells him no. It was the truth about her and Jack that probably made his heart stop. Mr. Donovan interrupts and says, "You said earlier that you only broke up with Jack today, after you got something from him that you would play for us. What is it?" Amelia takes out her phone and sets it on the table. Before she hits play, she says to the Connors, "This is going to be hard to listen to. You can leave if you want." Ethan looks at Erin, then says that they are staring. Amelia hits play. Chapter 8, Period 4. The students at Silver Oak are heading towards their last class of the day when cops rush into the school and block off the hallways between the front door and the side door. All the students stop to see what the commotion is about. A few jaws drop as they see Jack being led out in full restraints by 8 police officers. After they leave the building, Mr. Owens tells everyone to head back to class and that he will be making an announcement over the loudspeaker before the end of the day. Mr. Owens heads back to the boardroom. Everyone is sitting and arguing amongst themselves but quiets down when he enters. Mr. Donovan asks Amelia and Brian's 3 brothers to wait in the hallway so the adults can talk. They head to the hallway and sit in the chairs. Amelia is the first to speak. "Look, you 3, I'm sorry about what happened to Brian. I should have told Mr. Owens about Jack sooner. Mark, Brian's younger brother, tells Amelia what happened is not her fault. He says it's the school's fault for not finding out any information about Jack before accepting him first. Just then, the door opens and Ethan asks Troy to join them, and he does. Brian's youngest brother, Vernon, says, I know I speak for all my brothers when I say I forgive you. Amelia starts to cry again. Vernon asks her why she's crying. Amelia says that she doesn't think Brian will ever forgive her. The boardroom door opens again, and Troy walks out with his parents, who stop to talk to Amelia. Aaron says, Amelia, thank you for coming forward. That was brave of you, and I don't know if any of my kids said it yet, so I'll say it now. We all forgive you. Come see Brian whenever you want. Amelia hugs Aaron, then Ethan, then Brian's three brothers. Ethan says to Amelia that she is wanted in the boardroom, and they all leave. Amelia enters the boardroom and sees Mr. Donovan, Mr. Owens, and Miss Anderson waiting for her. She sits down and goes to say something before being interrupted by Mr. Donovan. Amelia, what you did today was very brave. Because of you, Jack will be going away for a long time. And also at the same time, you brought Brian's family some closure as to what happened to cause the fight. Mr. Owens tells Amelia that she isn't in trouble and that neither the school nor the school board are taking any action against her. Miss Anderson then says to Amelia, I talked to the worker at the home you're staying at. Since you turn 18 in less than a month, they told me that if you want, you can stay with me, and once you turn 18, I can legally adopt you with less paperwork. After hearing that, Amelia breaks down crying. She says that all she has ever wanted was a mom or dad who wanted her. Miss Anderson says to Amelia that since she knows what she's going through, she can have some time to think about it. Amelia gets up, goes over, and hugs Miss Anderson, then tells her that she already thought it over, and it's a yes. Just then, Principal Owens tells them that there are 10 minutes left in the day, and he has to go make an announcement. He asks Amelia if he may mention her by name and mention what she did today. Amelia tells him to go for it. Mr. Anderson makes his way to the main office. He asks the secretary to unplug the phones so they can't ring, then guard the door so nobody can come in. Once the secretary is standing guard, the principal hits the button on the loudspeaker microphone and begins. Staff and students of Silver Oak High. Earlier today, many of you saw one of our own students, Jack Grimes, being led out by 8 cops. I regret to inform you that Jack has been charged with 1 count of assault for threatening to kill Amelia Drew and 1 count of attempted murder for trying to kill Brian Connors, who many of you know is in the hospital fighting for his life. If it wasn't for Amelia and her bravery, Jack might have gotten away with what he did, so I ask that when you see her, you thank her. The school and school board have sent out emails or letters to all of your guardians about the situation. Please know that the staff here at Silver Oak High will do everything to protect you. I have one more important thing to say before I end this message. I have failed to do my duty and protect all the students at this school, so effective immediately, I am resigning as the principal of Silver Oak High. That is all. Chapter 9. Amelia's Visit Again. It has now been a month since Jack's arrest. He is set to appear in court tomorrow. Amelia has to be there as one of the witnesses. Before then, she decides to go see Brian one more time to try and calm her nerves. She enters his room and sits in her usual chair. She has been to see Brian almost every day since Jack got arrested, but today feels a little different to her. Hey Brian, it's Amelia again. I thought I would come to see you today since I will be in court all day tomorrow for Jack's trial. His lawyer is going to try to plead insanity. She talks to him about how she is feeling for tomorrow. She talks to him about her day, and she even reads the stack of cards she brought with her. Every time she comes in to see Brian, she always has cards from students or teachers from the school. She finishes reading the cards and sees Dr. Harvey walking by. She rushes out to talk to him. Dr. Harvey, wait, I need to talk to you. Dr. Harvey stops and asks her what she needs. She asks if he could have a team on standby in case Brian's heart stops again. He looks at her confused and asks her why his heart would stop again. She says, I want to tell him the truth again, but the last time I did that, his heart stopped. So could you please have a team on standby just in case? Dr. Harvey looks at the head nurse and tells her that they have a possible code heartbreaker. The nurse knows what that means and gets a team on standby. Dr. Harvey then tells Amelia the team is ready. She heads back into Brian's room and sits down. Hey, I'm back. I need to tell you another truth, and I really hope this one doesn't stop your heart this time. The truth is, Brian, I have liked you as more than a friend way before I started dating Jack. The only reason I didn't take my shot is because I was worried what other people would have thought. She closes her eyes and waits for the machines to start going crazy, but she hears something else instead. I have felt the same way about you for a long time too, Amelia, Brian says in a soft voice. Amelia opens her eyes to make sure she wasn't dreaming, and sure enough, Brian is awake. She moves her chair closer to hold his hand. She asks him, how much of that did you hear? He tells her that in some weird way, he has heard everything anyone has said to him while he was in a coma. Dr. Harvey comes into the room and asks Brian how he feels. Brian says he feels like he has been asleep for years. Amelia tells him that it has just been over a month. Dr. Harvey tells Brian that he's going to call his parents and leaves the room. Brian says to Amelia, listen, I forgive you, but I need you to do one thing for me. Promise me you'll go to court tomorrow and make sure Jack never sees the light of day again. Amelia says she promises. Brian says, then I promise you this. Since I won't be graduating this year, I promise to get strong enough that we can walk the stage together at graduation next year as boyfriend and girlfriend. When Amelia hears that, she asks Brian if he's serious. Brian says they can start dating now if she wants to. Amelia gets up and kisses Brian. As they are kissing, they hear people clapping. They stop kissing and look towards the door to see Brian's entire family and Amelia's adoptive mom, Miss Anderson, standing there. Miss Connor says it took them long enough to get together. Brian's three brothers hug Amelia and welcome her to the family. Miss Anderson interrupts and says, Amelia, I don't mean to be the uncool mom, but it's getting late and you have court in the morning. Amelia looks at Brian, who tells her to go. She kisses him goodbye and starts to leave with Miss Anderson. As she turns the corner, she hears Brian yell at her, Amelia, nail that piece of crap! Chapter 10. Jack. It's Jack's court date. The guard that has been watching him every day the last month, Tony, bangs on his cell door with his baton. Grimes, wake up and smell the roses. Today's the day. Your lawyer is at the courthouse waiting for you, he yells. Jack gets out of bed and changes into the suit his lawyer got him for court. Tony opens the cell door and tells Jack not to move or he will send in riot control. Jack stands still and allows Tony to put him in full shackles. Jack is then led by Tony and 5 other security guards to the van waiting outside to take him to court. Tony puts Jack in the back of the van and gets in with him. 3 other guards get in the back with Jack and Tony, while the other 2 head up to the front and drive. Once they reach the courthouse, they lead Jack to one of the meeting rooms where his lawyer, Miss Banks, is waiting for him. Jack sits in the chair, and Tony cuffs him to the table, then leaves the room. Let me begin by saying that if we win this case, that suit is coming out of your settlement, and if we lose, you can keep it to pay off your debts to the other inmates, says Mrs. Banks. Jack tells her he has no idea what she's talking about and asks her if the insanity plea will work. Mrs. Banks says, I don't think so. There's the video from the school that shows Brian throwing the first punch, but it also shows you beating him to a bloody pulp. There's also the recording from Amelia's phone with your confession that doesn't help. Plus, there's all the witnesses that will be there. Jack asks her who the witnesses are. She tells him that talking today will be the Connors, Amelia, Miss Anderson, former Principal Owens, the two teachers who broke up the fight, the school nurse, and an unnamed witness. Mrs. Banks is about to say something else when her phone dings with a message. Crap! We just had one more major witness added to the list. Jack asks her who it is. She looks at him concerned and tells him, it's Brian Connors. Jack's jaw just about hits the floor. He's awake? How? He asks furiously. Mrs. Banks says, apparently a visit and talk from Amelia woke him up. And there's more. They're now dating. Jack smiles like he just won first place in the Olympic. He asks Mrs. Banks, doesn't that mean the prosecutor can't use them as witnesses because that makes it seem like they had a reason to get me sent to jail? Mrs. Banks calls Tony into the room and heads to the judge's chambers to talk to Judge Graham. Mrs. Banks, what are you doing here? Court begins in less than 30 minutes, says Judge Graham. Mrs. Banks says she has something important they need to talk about and shows Judge Graham the message she got. She then asks Judge Graham if Brian and Amelia dating means they can't be used as witnesses. Judge Graham tells her that since they started dating after Brian woke up, they can still be called as witnesses, but she will go through all the other witnesses first and only call on them at the end if needed. Mrs. Banks looks pissed as she leaves the chambers and heads back to talk to Jack. As soon as she enters the room, Jack asks her what happened. She tells Jack what Judge Graham told her. Jack tells her that the insanity plea would still be their best option. They argue back and forth about it for 5 minutes until Tony and the guards enter the room. Tony tells them it's time to head into the courtroom. He uncuffs Jack from the table and back onto the chain. The guards form a barrier around him as Mrs. Banks leads them to the courtroom. As they enter the courtroom, Jack notices that everyone is sitting behind the prosecutor and that nobody is sitting behind him. As Jack sits in his chair, he thinks to himself, this is going to go terribly. Judge Graham calls the court to order. Judge Graham tells the prosecutor to call her first witness. The prosecutor calls Mr. Owens to the stand. Mr. Owens is sworn in and the prosecutor starts asking her questions. Mr. Owens, is it true that you are the former principal at Silver Oak High? Mr. Owens tells her that she is correct. She then asks Mr. Owens why he resigned as principal. I feel that I have failed my duty of protecting all the students at my school. I allowed a violent man like Jack to join our school without checking things out first. Judge Graham addresses the court and says, to anyone speaking here today as a witness, please only refer to the defendant as Mr. Grimes. Miss Prosecutor, you may continue your questioning. The prosecutor then asks Mr. Owens if he checks background information on all students before they join the school. Mr. Owens says not usually unless they join us for their last year like Jack. I'm sorry, Mr. Grimes did. The prosecutor and Mrs. Banks go back and forth asking Mr. Owens questions for an hour. Throughout the rest of the first half of court, the prosecutor calls the two teachers, the school nurse, and Miss Anderson to the witness stand before Judge Graham calls for a recess for lunch. During lunch, witnesses are kept in the same room even if they have spoken already. Amelia says Mr. Owens sitting by himself and goes to talk to him. Mr. Owens, she says as she sits with him, you said Jack only joined the school for the last year, but he, myself, and Brian have been going to school together since elementary school, so how is that possible? Mr. Owens tells Amelia he doesn't know, but what he said on the stand was the truth. Hey everyone, Jeremy here. Sorry to interrupt your listening. I'm giving this next chapter, chapter 11, trigger warnings for abuse, child abuse, violence, death, and torture. Please take care of yourself and prioritize your well-being while listening. If you would like to skip to the next chapter, please look down in the description down below for the timestamp. I will now give you 5 seconds to skip to the next chapter. Chapter 11. Jack 2. Judge Graham calls the court into order for the second half of Jack's case. We hear from Brian's parents and three brothers. It's time for an unnamed witness to enter the court. A girl about 25 years old is led to the witness stand by a bailiff. She is sworn in and then sits down. Everyone is holding their breath as the prosecutor walks towards the girl and asks her to tell everyone who she is. My name is Samantha Graves, and I am the sister of the real Jack Grimes. She points at Mr. Grimes and says, and the sister of him. His real name is Buster Graves, Jack's identical twin brother. The prosecutor asks Samantha to explain everything. Samantha says, first of all, my brother Jack's real last name was Graves too, not Grimes. Jack and Buster were born 7 years after I was born. Growing up, Jack was always the nicer brother. In preschool, Buster would bite any kid or person who got near him. In elementary school, he was kicked out of 10 different schools in kindergarten for hitting kids and teachers. So my mom, who was a single parent, decided to keep him home and try to homeschool him. But homeschooling didn't work, so she made a terrible decision and locked him in the basement of our house and would only unlock the door to give him food or empty his waste bucket. Judge Graham could tell people were getting uncomfortable and interrupted. She says, if you would like to leave the courtroom now, please do so, but wait in the witness room or lobby. She gives people a few minutes to leave, then tells Samantha to continue. Samantha says, late last year, my mom told me to feed him, so I unlocked the basement door, gave him his food, and emptied his bucket. I left and went to the grocery store as my brother Jack was coming home from school. I guess I forgot to lock the door because when I came home, I found blood on the floor and saw the basement door open. Before I could turn to run away and call for help, I felt a knife at my throat and then heard Buster say, hello, sister, in that sinister voice of his. He forced me to call Jack's school pretending to be my mom and tell them that we had a family emergency in the U.S. and we didn't know when we would be back. After I did that, he locked me in the basement with my mom and Jack's bodies. The prosecutor asked her how she escaped. She tells Judge Graham, when they arrested Buster and took his DNA, they got a match to my father, rest his soul, who has been in jail before. They tried to call us, but Buster disconnected the phone, so they tried calling anyone who knew us, and they said they haven't heard from us in almost a year, so they came to my house to do a wellness check. When they got there, they smelled the rotting bodies and called for a crime scene investigator. When they went to check the basement, they found me barely alive. I was rushed to the hospital where I stayed for a month, and then I was placed into protective custody until they could go after Buster. Judge Graham says, I have heard enough. I am making a judgment right now. She looks directly at Buster and says, Buster Graves, you are a disgusting human being. If Canada still had the death penalty, I would make sure you were put to death as soon as you left this courtroom. But since we don't, you get the following charges and sentences. 2 counts of murder, which both carry life sentences. 1 count of attempted murder, which carries a life sentence. 1 count of hostage taking, which carries a life sentence. There are other things I could charge you with, but it wouldn't change a thing. I sentence you to life in prison without the chance of parole. You won't see the outside again, and since our jail is in maximum security, we will be transferring you to the North Bay jail. Court is adjourned. After Judge Graham finishes, everyone gets up and cheers. Chapter 12, 6 months before prom. It has now been 6 months since Jack's trial. Amelia and Brian are talking in his hospital room. Brian says to Amelia, Dr. Harvey told me that if I keep getting better at my current pace, I'll be out of here a month before graduation. Amelia says even if he can't walk across the stage with her, she would gladly push him across. Just then, Brian looks up and sees his two bandmates, Gustavo Kane and Killian James, standing at his door. He looks at Amelia and says to her, "You know I love you and wouldn't ask you to leave unless this was personal business." Amelia says she knows, kisses Brian goodbye, and says goodbye to Killian and Gustavo on her way out. Once Amelia is gone, Brian looks at both of his bandmates and says, "God, I hate lying to her, but if she knew what we were planning, it would ruin the whole surprise." "She doesn't know you're getting out of here next month?" Killian asks. Brian explains that if she knew he was getting out, she would get suspicious if he went missing for hours without telling her where he was. Gustavo then cuts in and asks Brian to explain the plan again. Brian says, "The plan is for me to get out of here next month. The same day I get out, the three of us will get into Gustavo's car and drive down to London, Ontario for 3 months. While in London, London City Sound has permitted us to use their studio to work on the song we will sing at the promposal. 2 months before prom, the Starboys have agreed to get back together and meet us back here in Sudbury. For the whole month, we will be working side by side with them in the school basement to make sure everything goes perfectly. Also during that month, we will be sneaking around the school to talk to Mr. Donovan without Amelia seeing us. Finally, 1 month before prom, Plan BPSOHHES is a go. Now, can you guys remember that, or do you need me to write it down for you?" Gustavo and Killian look at each other and then at Brian. They both say at the same time, "We're not idiots. We can remember." Chapter 13, 5 months before prom. Brian is being discharged today. Before he hops into the car with Gustavo and Killian to drive down to London, he calls Amelia one more time from his hospital room. "Hey Amelia, it's Brian." Amelia goes to say something before he cuts her off. "Listen, I have to go to a hospital in Toronto for the next 4 months and I won't be able to talk to you. I just wanted to tell you that I love you and that you are the best thing that has ever happened to me. I promise to come back to you." Amelia tells him that she loves him too and to be safe before she hangs up. Brian puts the phone down and walks to his hospital room door. He stops and stares around the room one last time. He turns his back to the room, whispers under his breath, "Thank you for everything again, old friend," and walks away. In the waiting room, Gustavo and Killian are waiting for him. Before he heads out with them, he heads over and talks to Dr. Harvey one last time. "Dr. Harvey, I just wanted to thank you for everything, but thank you especially for not telling Amelia I was being discharged." Dr. Harvey says, "Brian, after you told me what you wanted to do, I couldn't help myself. It was like watching my daughter fall in love all over again while her fiance was in the hospital beating cancer in the same room that you were in so he could see his kids." Dr. Harvey tells Brian that he will have to let him know how everything goes. Brian says, "I will. I have to go now. Thank you again for everything. Goodbye, Uncle Harvey." Chapter 13, 3 months before prom. Brian, Gustavo, and Killian have been in London for 2 months. They have been in the London City Sound studio all day working on their song for the promposal. They are just about to head to the hotel when Greg stops them. "Listen, after hearing your story, we were happy to allow you to use our studio, but after hearing you sing, we want to do more to help. So I talked to the rest of the family and we all agreed to pay for you to play at London Music Hall. Of course, you would be opening for local band Left Foot Right Foot, but you would still get to perform live. What do you guys say?" Without even thinking about it, they all say yes. Greg tells them to go rest up for tonight and to show up for 7 p.m. sharp. 7 p.m. comes around and the guys have entered the venue. Greg comes up to them and says, "You guys go on at 7:30 to do your set, then introduce Left Foot Right Foot. Follow me to the back so you guys can warm up." The guys follow him to the back and warm up. 7:29 rolls around and they get ready to go on stage. Brian says, "Listen, I know that you guys are nervous. I know I am. But remember the band motto: no fears, more cheers. Greg tells them it's showtime and they head on stage. Brian grabs the guitar, Gustavo grabs the bass, and Killian sits at the drums. Brian says into the microphone, "My name is Brian. Gustavo is on bass, and Killian is on drums. Our name is Fire of Compassion, and we are an unknown pop band from Sudbury, Ontario that mostly makes romantic songs. They play their songs Enchanting Dreams, Romantic Summertime, Waiting for an Angel, and Nothing Lasts Forever." Brian says, "I hope you have enjoyed our set so far. My girlfriend and I have been through a lot together in the past almost year, so I wrote this last song for her called Baby, You're My One and Only. I hope you guys enjoy it." They play their last song, and as they finish, just expecting people to clap, they get a standing ovation. Gustavo says, "Please welcome to the stage London's very own Left Foot, Right Foot," as the three bandmates leave the stage to head out. Over the course of the rest of the month, they are in the studio and performing at London Music Hall every other day. It is now the final day of the month. The guys head to London City Sound one last time to talk to Greg. "Hey Greg, we just came to say goodbye and thank you for everything," says Killian. "If it wasn't for you, we might not have gotten as good as we are this fast," Gustavo says. Greg tells them his family was glad they could help and to come back anytime if they want to record and release an album with their 5 songs. The trio head outside, get in Gustavo's car, and head back to Sudbury. Chapter 15. 2 months before prom. Fire of Compassion has been working with the Star Boys for 2 weeks at this point. Mr. Donovan has agreed to let them use the basement at Silver Oak High and to make sure no students are allowed down there during the month. "That was good, boys. Let's run through the song again," says Elvis. The Star Boys are a famous group that broke up on good terms years ago, but are still hot today. The band consists of Elvis, Vinny, Kobe, Mac, and Darnell. "Okay, you guys, keep running through the songs. We will be back in a little while," says Brian. He and Vinny head up to talk to Principal Donovan while everyone is in class. They enter Mr. Donovan's office and sit down. Mr. Donovan asks them how everything has been going. Brian tells him everything is going good so far and then runs through Plan BPSOHHES. Principal Donovan tells Brian that everything will be set up the way he needs it and to send anybody he needs to make sure it is. Vinny then explains what needs to happen that day to make sure everything goes smoothly for the Star Boys. Mr. Donovan tells him it can be done, then wishes everyone good luck as Brian and Vinny sneak back to the basement. It is now the morning before graduation and 2 days before Plan BPSOHHES. The Star Boys and Fire of Compassion are in the basement. Fire of Compassion have just finished running through their song, Baby, You're My One and Only. Brian says, "Okay, everyone, let's run through the plan one more time." Elvis runs through the Star Boys part of the plan. "The day of the plan, we call the school when we are 5 minutes away so the principal can put the school on lockdown so nobody sees our tour bus. The teachers already know it's not a real lockdown so they don't panic. Once we get here, we get off the bus and it drives away. We head up to the auditorium and hide backstage. Once we're backstage, we call the principal and let him know so he can take the school off lockdown." Brian says he got everything absolutely perfect. Next, Gustavo explains his and Killian's part of the plan. "The day of the plan, we go through the start of our day as normal. During the second period, we ask our teachers to go to see the principal. They already know what we will actually mean when we ask, so they will let us go. We head up to the auditorium and hide backstage. Brian tells him that he got everything perfect. Now, it's time for Brian to explain his brother Troy's part of the plan and his part of the plan. Troy is going to come to the school in the morning and pretend to be working in the main office for the day in case Amelia sees him. Meanwhile, all morning I will be up in the auditorium setting everything up and running tests on the equipment. Once the lockdown is over, I will text Amelia and tell her Troy needs to talk to her in the office. He will then take her on the scavenger hunt. Once she gets up to the auditorium, everyone knows what to do from there. Just then, Killian gets a message on his phone. He says, "Shoot, we gotta go. The bus is getting ready to leave for graduation rehearsal. We can't miss it." Brian says to the Star Boys, "We will be gone all day. Do whatever you need to do for tomorrow. Just make sure you don't get seen." Brian grabs his backpack as the trio run to catch the bus. They get to the bus. Killian and Gustavo get on while Brian waits at the bottom of the stairs. Principal Donovan says, "Everyone, may I have your attention, please? I have an announcement to make." Everyone stops and looks at Mr. Donovan, who is standing at the front of the bus. He continues, "As you know, one of your fellow graduates has been in the hospital fighting for his life since being attacked by Jack Grimes. Well, he is out of the hospital and he is here. It is with great pleasure that I welcome back Brian Connors." Brian gets on the bus and all the students clap for him. Brian sees Amelia sitting at the back of the bus and goes to sit with her. "Brian, when did you get back to Sudbury?" she asks him. He tells her he's been back for a while but wanted to surprise her today. She kisses him and tells him she's glad he's back. Mr. Donovan says, "With that announcement out of the way, who's ready to get to grad rehearsals?" All of the students cheer. Mr. Donovan tells the bus driver they are good to go. The bus driver closes the door and drives away from the school. Chapter 16, Graduation Day. Today is graduation day. The graduates have the day off to get dressed up for tonight. Amelia is sitting at the table talking to her adoptive mom, Miss Anderson, when there's a knock at the door. Amelia goes and opens the door to see Brian and his three brothers standing there in suits. "Brian, what are you guys doing here all dressed up?" she asks him. Brian says, "Well, I came to talk to your mom in private while my three brothers take you out for the day. Is that okay with you, Miss Anderson?" Miss Anderson says that sounds like a good idea, but to make sure Amelia is back home 2 hours before graduation. Troy says he will make sure she is, as he, his two brothers, and Amelia walk out the door, leaving Brian to talk to Miss Anderson. During the day, Troy and his two brothers take Amelia to Science North, Cineplex, and Dynamic Earth. Troy is driving the car when Amelia asks him, "Where are we going?" Vernon tells her that their parents wanted to see her before graduation to talk to her. They drive into their driveway, and before they get out, Mark says to Amelia, "I need to put this blindfold on you for a surprise." Mark puts the blindfold on Amelia. Troy helps her out of the car. Then the three brothers help guide her to the backyard. When the blindfold is taken off, Amelia sees that the Connors has set up a candlelit dinner for her. Mr. Connors says, "We talked to your mom and told her we will drive you to graduation so you can enjoy dinner with us." The Connors and Amelia sit and talk for half an hour until Mrs. Connors taps her glass with a fork. She looks at Amelia and says, "I wanted to make a toast to you, Amelia. If it wasn't for you, Brian might not be alive today. Buster might not be in jail, and his family might not have gotten justice. So thank you for everything, and no matter what happens between you and Brian, you will always be part of this family." The rest of the family says, "Hear, hear." Then they drink. Meanwhile, Brian is just finishing his conversation with Mrs. Anderson. "Thank you for this, Miss Anderson. I didn't know who else to talk to, so that's why I came here," he says. Miss Anderson tells him he's welcome, then looks at her watch. She tells him that they need to leave for graduation, or they won't make it in time. So they get in Miss Anderson's car and head to graduation. Chapter 17, Clam Biggest Proposal Silver Oak High has ever seen. Today is the day. Second period has come around. All the students are in class. Brian is on the auditorium. Gustavo and Killian are backstage. The Star Boys should be on the way, and nothing can go wrong. Brian gets a message on his phone. "No! Why this on today of all days?" he says. Killian comes over and asks him what's wrong. Brian tells him that Elvis just messaged him and told him the tour bus has not one, but 3 flat tires, and they can't get it fixed until tomorrow. Killian asks him what they are going to do since they need the Star Boys for the plan to work. Brian says, I'm going to go talk to Principal Donovan and call the whole thing off. Let Gustavo know and wait for me to get back. Brian leaves the auditorium and heads to the main office. As he enters the main office, he sees Mr. Donovan talking to Police Chief Michaels. Ah, there's the man we were looking for. Chief Michaels would like to talk to you, Brian, says Mr. Donovan. Brian asks Chief Michaels why he was looking to talk to him. Chief Michaels tells Brian that they got a call from Elvis of the Star Boys saying that there was a letter attached to their tour bus window when they found the tire slashed last night. Chief Michaels says, we had our people check it for any type of residue that could harm you, then read the letter. Apparently your old friend Jack told his brother Buster about your promposal plan, and Buster planned his revenge in case he went to jail. Brian says to Chief Michaels, I was just coming up here to tell Mr. Donovan plan biggest promposal Silver Oak High has ever seen is off because of the slashed tires. Mr. Donovan says, well, the show must go on. Chief Michaels owed me a favor and I decided to use it on you. So he made a phone call and the Star Boys are getting a police escort here as we speak. So head on back to the auditorium and get ready because I will be putting the school into lockdown in 5 minutes. Brian rushes back to the auditorium and tells Gustavo and Killian what's happening. Then the announcement is made that the school is going into lockdown. 7 minutes later, the Star Boys arrive backstage and the lockdown ends. Brian texts Amelia and tells her that Troy needs to talk to her in the office. Okay, guys, Amelia should be heading to the office. Let's test the equipment and instruments quickly before she gets here. Meanwhile, Amelia has just entered the office and sees Troy. Hey, Troy, Brian said you needed to talk to me. Troy hands her a letter with the following written on it. To my beautiful girlfriend. To start off, I'm sorry for lying to you. I got out of the hospital 5 months ago and have been planning a big surprise for you. The surprise is ready for you today, but in order for you to find it, you must first go on a scavenger hunt. Troy has the first clue for you. He is also there to help you if you get stuck and need a hint. Anyways, I love you. See you soon. Troy reads her the first clue that says, this person is someone you go to for guidance. Amelia says that Brian is definitely talking about her mom. They head to Miss Anderson's office. When they get there, Amelia says, hey Mom, I'm doing a scavenger hunt to get a big surprise from Brian. Do you happen to have clue number 2? Miss Anderson says she does and hands it to Amelia. The scavenger hunt takes her to talk to a science teacher, a gym teacher, a woodshop teacher, and finally the principal. She and Troy enter Mr. Donovan's office. Amelia says, Principal Donovan, I'm doing a scavenger hunt to get a big surprise from Brian. Do you have my surprise? Mr. Donovan tells her that he does not have the surprise. Just as Amelia is about to ask Troy for a hint, she gets a video message from Brian. Hey there! Troy tells me you have reached the end of your scavenger hunt. Unfortunately, the surprise was too big to put in Mr. Donovan's office, so we had to put it in the auditorium. Make your way up here. I'm waiting for you. Love you. Amelia asks Troy if Brian is being serious. Troy tells her that he is, and that Brian is up in the auditorium right now. Amelia, who never breaks school rules, says to Principal Donovan, permission to run in the halls? Mr. Donovan tells her permission has been granted. Amelia takes off running to the auditorium. Amelia gets to the auditorium and only sees a single chair. Just as she's about to leave, she gets another video message on her phone from Brian. Okay, I'm sorry, I lied to you again. I'm not in the auditorium right now, but the surprise is on the stage behind the curtain. Once this video ends, I want you to sit in the chair, count down from 3, then yell hit it, and I promise you something will happen. I love you, and I hope you enjoy the surprise. I promise you I will see you soon. Amelia thinks to herself, I guess Brian really isn't here. I was hoping to enjoy the surprise with him, but I guess not. She sits in the lone chair, counts down from 3, and yells hit it. The curtains open to reveal the Star Boys standing on the stage. They perform their hit song, Sweet Conversations, and then sit at the edge of the stage. Star Boys, what are you doing here? She asks excitedly. Vinny explains to Amelia that they heard about what happened and wanted to put on a show for her and Brian. Amelia says, if the show was for the both of us, then why isn't Brian here? Elvis tells her to stand up and turn around. When she does, she sees Brian standing there holding a sign. Brian says, Amelia, you are the best thing to ever happen to me. I can't think of anyone else I want to go to prom with. So will you go to prom with me? Amelia hugs him, gives him a kiss, and then says yes. Brian says there is one more surprise. He heads up on stage and calls out Gustavo and Killian from backstage while the Star Boys bring out more chairs to sit next to Amelia. Brian says, our name is Fire of Compassion. Amelia, I wrote this song just for you. It's called Baby, You're My One and Only. They finish the song and Amelia runs up on the stage and kisses Brian. I can't believe that anyone would write a song just for me, she says. Brian thanks the Star Boys for all their help in agreeing to get back together after all these years. Kobe says, the guys and I had a wonderful time singing together after all these years, and because our 25-year anniversary is coming up, we decided we are going to release one more album and go on tour one more time for old time's sakes. Fire of Compassion and Amelia say goodbye to Vinny, Kobe, Mac, Elvis, and Darnell as they leave to go back to their hotel. Chapter 18. What is happening? It is now August. Brian is packing his bags to head on tour starting tomorrow with his band and the Star Boys for the next 2 years. Meanwhile, Amelia is packing her bags to go to school in Toronto for the next 4 years. Let's start the end of our journey with Amelia. Amelia is in her room packing her bags when her mom calls her to the living room. She enters the living room and sees her mom sitting on the couch with a present for her. Miss Anderson says, before I give this to you, I need to say something to you. I am so proud of you for the woman you have become. You have been through so much in your life, from losing your parents at 10 to having to go through all this stuff with Buster and Brian. I'm just glad that you and Brian finally found each other and are happy. And I want you to know, no matter how far you are from each other, nothing can keep you apart. Miss Anderson hands Amelia the present that has 3 things inside. The first 2 things are framed collages of pictures she took of Amelia and Brian at prom and graduation. The third thing is a heart necklace that breaks into 2. Miss Anderson says, I'm going to drive you over to the Connors. Brian says he needs to see you tonight. I thought that when we got there, you could give him one of the framed collages and half of the necklace. Amelia tells her that sounds like a wonderful idea. They both get up, grab their coats, and head out to Miss Anderson's car. Meanwhile, Brian and his family are setting things up outside for another candlelit dinner, but this time the band is there to perform their song again. Brian says to Killian and Gustavo, I need you guys to run a quick sound test to make sure everything is working while I help my family finish setting up. Brian heads inside where his family is in chaos. His parents are fighting about the food, and his brothers are fighting about the dishes and utensils. Brian yells for everyone to be quiet. Once everyone settles down, he says, Mom, Dad, you two have been cooking meals together for us for years. This meal is no different. And you 3, as he looks at his brothers, we need 10 of everything. So Vernon, you grab the plates. Troy, you grab the glasses. And Mark, you grab the utensils. When you get outside, go around the table in a single line starting with Vernon and make sure every placemat gets a plate, knife, spoon, fork, and glass. Do it fast but safely. Brian heads back outside to talk to his band. Killian tells him that everything is good to go. He turns around to see his brothers coming out with the dishes and utensils. Just then, he hears Miss Anderson's car pull into the driveway. TMV, finish setting the table quickly, then go help Mom and Dad bring the food out. Killian and Vernon, come with me. We have to cause a distraction for a couple of minutes. The trio head to the front of the house to greet Amelia and Miss Anderson. While Killian and Gustavo are talking to Amelia, Miss Anderson whispers to Brian, "Is everything okay? Is the thing not happening tonight?" Brian tells her that the family is just running a little behind and needs time to finish setting up. Miss Anderson says to Amelia, "Amelia, where's the presents you have for Brian?" Amelia says that they are still in the car and grabs them. She hands the first one to Brian. "My mom got two of these made for us so no matter how far apart we are, we can still see each other." She then hands him half the necklace. Brian reads the necklace out loud. "No matter how far, we will always be close to each other's hearts." Brian says that he loves the presents. He then hears Troy yell at him from the backyard, "Brian, we're ready for you." Amelia asks him what that was all about. Brian says, "It's the first of your last four surprises before I leave to go on tour." They head to the backyard with Brian covering Amelia's eyes and Killian guiding her. Once Killian helps Amelia sit down, Brian uncovers her eyes. "Amelia, this is all for you. And just because we felt like it," he says as the band walks over to their instruments, "we are going to perform your song for you tonight." Fire of Compassion finish their song and joins everyone else at the table. They all talk and eat for 10 minutes until Brian says, "Will you excuse me?" Everyone is talking when Brian comes back. He says, "Amelia, I hope you're ready for the second of your last four surprises. Since our tour is starting tomorrow night right here in Sudbury, I talked to our new manager. I got you and your mom front row tickets to the concert." Amelia kisses Brian and thanks him for the tickets. Brian says, "Tomorrow night, would you be willing to come up on stage with the band so we can perform your song for you in front of everybody?" Amelia says, "Absolutely yes. I have always wanted to get on stage at a concert." It is now the next night. Fire of Compassion have just finished their song Waiting for an Angel. Brian says into the microphone, "Sudbury, I hope you have enjoyed our set so far. Before we perform our final song, I want to bring out someone near and dear to the band, but especially to me. Please help me welcome to the stage my girlfriend, Amelia Drew." The crowd goes wild as Amelia walks onto the stage. Brian says, "Our last song is called Baby, You're My One and Only. I wrote it about her. So, Amelia, this one is for you." Fire of Compassion finishes their song. Gustavo and Killian head off before leaving Brian and Amelia on the stage alone. Brian, talking into the microphone, says to Amelia, "Yesterday, I told you I had four surprises for you before I go on tour and gave you two of them. Well, please welcome to the stage with surprise number 3, the Star Boys." The Star Boys come out carrying two teddy bears, two bouquets of roses, and a box of chocolates. They put everything on the stage in front of Amelia. Brian says, "The Star Boys are going to leave the stage now, but we'll be back out to perform in a couple of minutes. Now for your last surprise. I need to say something before you turn around." The crowd starts screaming as Amelia wonders what is happening behind her. Brian says, "I need everyone to quiet down so she can hear me say this." The crowd quiets down. Brian continues, "Amelia Drew, you are the best thing to ever happen to me, and what we have been through proves that we could get through anything together. Since we won't be seeing each other for at least 2 years, I wanted to do this tonight. Turn around for your final surprise." Amelia turns around to see Brian on one knee, holding a ring. He says, "Will you make me the happiest man in the world and marry me?" Amelia breaks down crying and says yes. The crowd erupts in cheers and chaos as Amelia and Brian kiss. Well, folks, that is the end of the book, but please stick around for these final messages and then a sneak peek of other things. But, anyways, like I was saying, thank you guys for listening. This has been my first book, and at the time of recording this, I have started working on technically my second and third book, You will get a sneak peek of the second book in a second. The third book is an autobiography of my life. But if you guys only listen to one chapter, thank you. If you guys listen to the whole thing, thank you. And now, warning. Following this message is chapter 1 of my next book, Hidden Desires, a tale of love and redemption, plus titles for other books I may write in the future. Please listen for a sneak peek. Chapter 1, a high school basketball court. Johnny, Scott, Tom, and Chad are all best friends who are on their high school basketball team. They are currently outside running a quick practice before they get on the bus to head to their first game of the season. Scott looks up to see Tracy having a smoke by herself. "Hey, Big J, Crazy T is having a smoke by herself again," he says to Johnny. "I thought I told you guys to stop calling her Crazy T. She's not crazy. She just likes to have a smoke by herself after school," says Johnny. Tom says, "I think she heard you call her Crazy T, Scott. She's walking over here to talk to you." Tracy storms onto the court and starts yelling at Scott. Just as she's about to slap him, Johnny stops her. "Tracy, calm down. Let's walk back over to your spot and talk." Tracy curses at Scott the whole time she and Johnny are walking back to her spot. "Look, I'm sorry about the guys. They are just trying to get pumped up before our game. I promise you I will talk to them again," Johnny tells her. Tracy is getting ready to start yelling at Johnny when he pulls out 2 smokes and lights one for himself and one for Tracy. They smoke for a couple of minutes until Johnny says, "Listen, I have to go hop the bus with my team, but if you ever want to talk, just let me know." Johnny gets on the bus with his team and sits with the guys. Chad says, "So what did Crazy T have to say?" Johnny looks at him and says, "I want you three to listen and listen close. Stop calling her Crazy T. The truth is, I really like her. I probably won't ever tell her, but it is the truth. So for my sake, stop calling her Crazy T." The guys all apologize and promise to stop calling her Crazy T. As the bus pulls away, Johnny looks out the window and waves at Tracy. Tracy waves back and gives Johnny a wink. "Did you guys see that? Tracy winked at me. Do you think she likes me too?" Johnny asks the guys. The guide tells Johnny that she winks at every guy she sees and that he isn't special. Now, a preview of titles for books I may write in the future. Fires of Fate, A Love in Jeopardy, a sequel to Hidden Desires. A Trail of Lies, unraveling the mystery of Cameron's death. Revenge Unhinged, a sequel to A Trail of Lies. A Father's Fury. And finally, the other book I'm currently writing, Jeremy Chaput, Capturing the Moments That Shaped Me. Well, there you guys have it. That was a sneak peek to my next book, and then a sneak peek of other books I may write in the future, including the title of my autobiography. So, thank you guys for listening. As my 2 sayings always go, always shoot your shot before it's too late, and always tell your loved ones you love them, because you never know how much time you have left with them. Thank you guys for listening, and have yourself a good day.